All right, well, good morning. Thanks for joining us. We're here in Lawrenceburg at our ENCONA office, and our guest today is Ryan. Ryan's the CEO and president of the Chamber of Commerce, so welcome.
Alex, it's great to be here.
So tell us what's new at the Chamber.
Well, what's new at the Chamber? Well, our community is located in a very high growth area, and so we're constantly evolving as an organization. The new thing right now is that we are focused very much on more commercial and residential development, which, being in a rural community, there are different cycles of economic development, starting, of course, first with job creators and job creation,
Sure.
whether it's in our case, typically manufacturing. And then it's the ancillary things that support that. Again, as jobs are created, workers need homes, residential development. As jobs are created, workers want to do something after work. Think about restaurants, retail, and the like.
Leisure.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So we're playing in that space in a heavier way for the first time in a long time, really. And we're lucky in our community, the Chamber of Commerce has the flexibility to take that on and tackle those problems. And then, of course, set goals, accomplish them. And again, you see evidence here that we're capitalizing on a lot of the southern growth that's happening, specifically in Middle Tennessee and North Alabama.
Sure, sure. Well, that's definitely one of the things we wanted to talk about this morning was the growth not only in the local industry, but specifically within the automotive sector
Yeah.
and all the sort of tertiary industries, retail you mentioned that comes along with that. And I think what's unique about your organization is that the chamber here, from what I can tell, is much more than just sort of tourism. It's playing a much larger role in the local economy so far as economic development, bringing in industries. And you also just had your 75th anniversary, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. And over that entire 75 years, as I mentioned, we evolved, we've grown. And, back in the day, it really was more of a civic club for businesses.
Sure.
And in the early 2000s, our local leaders said, hey, there's an opportunity to form a public-private partnership instead of it being wholly, private sector. And said, let's really tackle economic development as an industry. Let's get some professionals in there, and let's be more intentional about recruiting jobs. And so today, our organization, yes, has about 450 members total that are local businesses, regional businesses, manufacturers to mom and pop restaurant. But we also have a technical staff that handles economic development, which in a traditional sense is developing land for manufacturers, going and recruiting those companies, helping our community plan with regard to infrastructure, utilities, roads, and the like. And then, as you mentioned, tourism. We actually started about 9 years ago driving a new tourism strategy because we understood its importance to, again, creating jobs. Workers are moving here, people are moving here. Well, people want to try before they buy,
Sure.
right? And tourism is a big piece of that. And so, and we have a lot to market in that space too. And so, as kind of outlined in a different way, our chamber has community development, which is the membership side of the world. We have the economic development, and then we have the tourism development. And those are kind of the three tenets of what we do. And like I said, or like you mentioned, Alex, over the past 75 years, it's grown, and now we have a powerhouse organization, 6 professional staff. And also, we're just the visionaries of the community. And it's like I tell our local leaders, they outfit us, they resource us appropriately. They get all the credit. We've got a great team of whether it's local mayors, commissioners, councilmen, aldermen, going all the way up, relationships with state and federal leaders as well. And our job is to make sure that we're all singing the same song. We're all Team Lawrence County. And again, in today's conversation, I think you'll better understand that it works.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the results are certainly there. I've had a front row seat to that, both professionally and personally, working and living here in the county for years and years. And I can remember back into the 90s, and a lot of the factories here, the textiles, some of the other manufacturing was, either being closed, out of business, going overseas. And, went to several of the auctions where the machinery's being, scrapped out and just empty buildings sitting there.
Yeah.
And then, going from, the early 2000s to where we're at today with not only those industries and buildings coming back and flourishing and new growth coming in, but just the large investments that are happening here from new companies, the Magna facility, FedEx facility, Craig Manufacturing, it's just really become a booming part of the economy here.
Yeah, it has. Of course, we first and foremost believe we are the companies we keep, so we have a pretty extensive existing industry strategy. With that said, those existing industries are growing as well. They're moving people in, and in fact, a gentleman from Modine Manufacturing Company, which is another local automotive and commercial vehicle supplier. I was with their HR manager, and he was talking about how when he moved here, Lawrenceburg and Lawrence County was just the busiest small town he's ever been in, and again, it's because we've backfilled all those jobs that were lost in the late '90s, mid 2000s. Again, being born and raised here in the area, man, it's good to see the home team thrive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, Lawrenceburg's got a unique connection to Canada.
Yeah.
I've had the pleasure of working with several different companies, and even our company that we're here at today has a headquarters in Canada. And so there's always been a unique connection with this town. You know, out of all the towns in Tennessee, and Lawrenceburg's just really got that strong tie commercially with several Canadian businesses.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's cross sector, right? It is primarily automotive, but also some construction equipment.
Sure.
And I didn't really think much about it until I actually had the chance to go to Canada as part of a recruiting mission and talking with Craig Manufacturing. They make attachments for, just construction equipment. So think about big buckets. Think about, things that push dirt out of mines. And they make some really big things, and they can make small things too. But we got to go up, and I realized, we already have 2 or 3 Canadian-based companies. And then since that time, we've added 2 or 3 more Canadian-based companies. And it's just it's a good cultural fit for our rural area. And there's really cool people too. I mean, Les Harding and Ben Craig at Craig Manufacturing, they came here and they said it feels like home. We went up there and said, wow, we see why it feels like home, because their community they're in, they're in New Brunswick, Canada, felt like home. And ultimately, we're seeing our Canadian companies grow and leaps and bounds. In fact, I think by 2027, I think is the statistic, we're going to add another 300 jobs at those Canadian-based plants, and that's really exciting.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think some of the connections, similar to what you mentioned, our other office in North America is in Alberta. So a lot of similarities between the culture and industries in Alberta and Tennessee. EZA Design and Manufacturing here in Precision Laser. They're also got some connections with Manitoba and Alberta. So just a lot of similarities. It brings up another point I wanted to discuss, which was we've got a lot of growth happening, particularly here in Middle Tennessee, centered around Lawrenceburg, because of the Ford facilities coming in with the Blue Oval City. What have you seen happening with that? Yeah,
so that's been interesting, and I think it would be good to bring in some context of not just the Ford Blue Oval City, but also what's happening at General Motors in Spring Hill, which is just about 45 minutes north of us, and then the Mazda Toyota manufacturing facility there in North Alabama, which is about an hour or so from us. What we've noticed is as those OEMs set up shop, there's 2 types of supplier. There's the ones that need to be next door, and then there's the ones that, hey, we have a little bit more flexibility. And our geographic location lends itself to being very suitable for existing businesses getting some of that business, right? Because they don't have to be next door, or those new suppliers locating in our area. So, for example, Magna International, Magna Structures Tennessee technically is the local branch. They set up shop here, or I guess I should say they are setting up shop here, building a 500,000 square foot facility. They'll ultimately employ about 250 people after a $200 million investment. And it's their first stamping plant that they're building out in about 30 years. And that's exciting because while yes, it was initiated by Ford and Blue Oval City and everything going on there, it's not dedicated to Ford and Blue Oval City.
Sure.
And of course, we've all seen the news headlines, the EV consumer adoption projections are a roller coaster, if anything. And, and I think that our local facilities are well positioned, one, to meet the need long term, but also flex in the short term as that happens. But Tennessee is an automotive state, going back to Saturn locating here, Nissan locating here, Volkswagen, and then Ford Blue Oval City, just massive amount of capital coming in, and our this is, I would argue, as important as money coming in, but people coming in that have the skills or can at least learn the skills, setting up programs to give people the skills to access those opportunities and really innovate the automotive industry. That's what we're really, really excited about here in Tennessee.
Yeah, that brings up a couple of points I wanted to mention, but I do want to back up and just sort of introduce a little bit about what we do and
Sure.
why we came to be in Lawrenceburg. So ENCONA stands for Engineering Consulting Academy. And we've been around for about 20 years, first operating in Europe, then later in South Africa, Taiwan, and then North America for the last 10 or 11 years. This office originally was located in Michigan.
Yep.
And so, you think about, Motor City, and we still have a lot of great customers up there. But the new growth that we saw happening was in the southeast, and Lawrenceburg is really, if you were to throw a dart at a map and put it right in the center of where all the activity is happening, it really is central to that. You've got the interstate corridors leading to, you've got, the OEMs there in Chattanooga, Memphis now. You mentioned Spring Hill, also Smyrna, and then we've also got Mercedes there in Tuscaloosa. And so we're kind of central to all of that. And then the tier ones, coming to the area for the same reasons. Yeah. What we've seen with the regard to the Blue Oval specifically, SK Blue Oval working with that company. We've also done work with Magna, and we've got several other smaller companies that are setting up shops here in the area to support that. But you're right; it's the current situation is such that the tier ones are diversifying. Yep. Typically now you have a tier one supplying to German OEMs as well as domestic OEMs, and so their portfolios are very diversified for that reason. And so, a lot of the work that we do is with those tier ones.
Sure.
Now, traditionally, what we are in the business of doing is providing training and certifications for the standards that those OEMs require. Right. ISO standards, IATF standards, VDA standards. We have a license from the German Automotive Association to provide those training and certifications here. And we've got the only license to do that in Canada. And so we're constantly in both markets as well in North America for that reason. But it's been really exciting. I think that, the state of Tennessee in particular has done a great job at cultivating and attracting those investments from the automotive industry. Just looking at that example of Blue Oval, we've got $5.6 billion investment from Ford in that campus, $500 million incentives from the state, and that's projected, the last numbers I saw something around 27,000 jobs overall to Tennessee. But, going back to what you were talking about, your collaboration both at the federal and state level, I think that's what's unique about your organization in Lawrence County is keeping that connection, keeping Lawrenceburg on the map, to the broader economy. So again, that's just a testament to what your team is able to achieve.
Well, definitely, it takes teamwork, and like you mentioned, the collaboration between the State Department of Economic and Community Development. Not a lot of people know this, but there are people proactively recruiting businesses to Tennessee all the time. And also, there are people proactively reaching down into communities to help businesses grow all of the time. And that's why it's so important to have a local economic development practitioner to access those people that do that. Because ultimately there are 7 million Tennesseans and across 95 counties. And so you need someone to build that relationship, make sure that first and foremost, we're selling the state of Tennessee. But then when it gets down to the nitty gritty, we can compete with, our friends over in Jackson or Chattanooga or Cookeville or Knoxville, but ultimately it's about our state growing, getting everyone on the same page, putting our best foot forward and saying, hey, we're here not just to say welcome to Tennessee, but innovate here in Tennessee, grow in Tennessee, put down roots here in Tennessee. And again, we've seen the results of that happen locally.
I think the state has done a great job at cultivating and attracting that business from the automotive industry. If you look at Ford Blue Oval, for example, a $5.6 billion investment from Ford. The state had put up $500 million in capital investment incentives, and then roughly 27,000 jobs from the last projection I saw coming into the Tennessee area.
That's exactly right. And that doesn't happen on accident. It's an intentional approach to economic development to attract those transformative projects. Folks don't know this, but it takes a lot of teamwork. I think that should be assumed, but the team starts at the local level and then goes up to the state level. And so we have our friends at the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development that, there are people every day that are out proactively recruiting new businesses to Tennessee. There are people that support existing businesses every day. And it's my job as a local economic developer to build relationships with those folks so that when a local company needs resource, or as we recruit companies ourselves, that we can all get together, talk, and just have an intentional conversation of how can we help? Because that's really the question we're answering. How do you mitigate risk? How do you also develop new industrial property? There's a whole division within the State Department that does the same thing. There's also a team that does more of the livability type things, right? They do the downtown development. They do additional marketing activities, and that's at the state level. More at the federal level, there's actually a department within the Tennessee Valley Authority, which is our power generator, for lack of better terms, here in a 7-state region. And they have a team that also goes and proactively recruits businesses. They support businesses in various ways. And when all of us come to the table, it really does matter. It makes a big difference because companies like Ford, they sit back and say, okay, they actually want us here. They can support us here. Of course, everyone has an interest, right? You're standing up a business. There's a profit motive. In our case, it's job creation, capital motive. And it's going to take that united front as we tackle the changing landscape of what's going to happen in the next wave of growth. I think you're going to see higher capital investments. You're going to see lower jobs, and things are going to be less location dependent, which is going to be really good for rural communities.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back to, creating that ecosystem for that growth, not just in Tennessee, but overall for the Southeast.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've had to adapt and work in the automotive industry is, what the automotive industry represents. It's no longer just about a car.
Right.
It's much more than that. And so, today we think of the automotive industry in terms of mobility, and mobility being that confluence or integration of energy, transportation, and technology. And what that means is it's not just about, meeting and satisfying, appealing to the consumer or the driver. It's also about, balancing other factors such as, social expectations, sustainability expectations, both in terms of the environment and resource availability. And what that's meant for the industry is, companies that were traditionally not part of that are now very much central to that. You think about battery production, consumer electronics, and so I think it's really broad in, who's involved and connected to that industry. And then for the industry, I think it represents such a, much more vital element of the economy. I mean, it touches just so much of what we see happening, in the marketplace. And so that's brought with it a lot of opportunities, a lot of challenges, a lot more investment. But that's where we're at today.
Yeah, no, it's true. And like you mentioned, to condense that, it's really how do mobility assets interact with communities as well, right? Especially as we are on this long runway to connected autonomous vehicles. ICE, internal combustion engines, are going to be around for a while, but what is that actual transition like to hybrid and then fully electric? Or is there another power that comes in and says, hey, this is actually the new technology? And ultimately, communities have to be prepared, not just for the investment from the manufacturing side, but also how people use these new mobility tools. And that's what's so exciting, because I think really over the next, I would say 4 or 5 decades, we're going to see a massive change with regard to, I'll say it this way. I hope one day that parking is just not a thing, right? Like, I hope that I can integrate my Microsoft calendar, whatever it is. It says, hey, Ryan, you need to be at work at 8 o'clock, and just Uber automatically picks me up, right?
Sure.
So, and that's going to shake things up. But, may not be in my lifetime, may not be in our lifetime, Alex, but, things are going that direction. And so having services, whether it's through ENCONA, support from communities to help the industries change, to make sure that when they're maintaining relevancy, make sure their workers are well equipped and prepared, it matters quite a bit.
Right, absolutely. That's one of the things that we see with a lot of our customers and suppliers is balancing that rate of change with innovation. There's such a drive right now to innovate, to go on to what's next, to shift to EVs. And while I think that, that is the eventual outcome, it's balancing and managing that rate of change in a way that's sustainable, much more in the short term. It used to be when I would visit plants all over, particularly in the Southeast, the number one challenge that I would hear from presidents, CEOs, plant managers was manpower. And not just, labor, but skilled manpower. Where do we get people that have the technical, background to operate our equipment? I think that's gotten better. I think there's a lot of programs out there, whether it's through, technical colleges, apprenticeships. But I think the aftermath of the pandemic has somewhat abated in the last couple of years. The number one challenge I hear right now are with both OEMs and tier 1s and tier 2s that have these EV infrastructures built out and don't have the volume to support the capacity that they've built, both in terms of CapEx and headcount. And I think we see that playing out in the market today. I was looking at some data from one of our researchers recently, and one of the things we're heavily focused on is what does that shift look like on pace between ICE or internal combustion and hybridization versus BEV or battery electric vehicles. And what we see happening right now is there is a growth rate.
Yep.
It's about 20 to 30% year over year if you're looking 2022, 23, and year to date 2024. But what is happening is the hybrid vehicles are outpacing the battery electric vehicles. So you've got a roughly 53% increase year over year in sales with the hybrid vehicles. And you can infer quite a bit from that data. What I think is happening anecdotally is that there are a lot of hesitations about the infrastructure.
Yeah.
But then maybe also about the technology. Personally, I think that there's an economic facet to this, and that the cost of ownership has to be at a price point where people are comfortable making that shift, both in terms of the MSRP of the vehicle from the dealership, but then the maintenance costs, the infrastructure to charge the vehicle. And I think that's what's potentially lagging behind the expectations of the sales projections. One of the biggest discussions right now in the industry is what comes first. Is it the cart before the horse, chicken before the egg?
Right.
Do we build the infrastructure and then everyone buys, or do we have to get more vehicles at a price point on the market so that the demand for charging infrastructure increases?
Right.
And I know the states have done quite a bit, to build out infrastructure for charging.
Yep.
I think it's going to take the private sector coming to the table, with the incentive from the market demand to build that out in a way that, it's going to be widespread adoption.
Yeah, and that goes back to my comment about, how does this new technology interact with communities, and then how do communities prepare? We're very lucky. As I mentioned, we're in the Tennessee Valley Authority region, 7-state region. They've invested in charging infrastructure, and then also the state of Tennessee has invested in it. The Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation has actually partnered, I think, with Rivian and a couple others to put chargers in all of the state parks. Mm-hmm. So and Lawrence County is home to a few fast chargers. I don't know that we have like the level 3 yet, but faster than what you might plug in at home.
Sure.
And it's actually funny. Yesterday I was with our local electric company, and they were talking about because they partnered with TVA to put a charger in just south of town here, and I think it was used 134 times over the last month, which is
quite a bit,
which is more than one would expect.
Sure.
But of course, the paradox here in Lawrence County is that you've got people plugging up to charge, driving electric vehicles, and you also have Amish buggies on the road. So, but all in, we're very lucky in Tennessee that we've got that kind of slow build.
Sure.
I do think we don't want to overbuild, right? Because there are many other problems in our economy that we're facing, and in communities that we're facing, just to be blunt. And so. But charging is a major thing. Workforce is another major thing. Something that has not helped the case for BEVs in this situation is also inflation. Mm-hmm. So there are national inflationary pressures. And again, I think that's why everyone is just hyper-focused on this election. And for better or for worse, we're going to get through it. And the industry is going to automate. But the good news is the consumer base is here in North America, really in the Western Hemisphere. Right. And so, ultimately, yes, you mentioned capacity issues at plants, whether it's CapEx or manpower. But we need to build out more manufacturing plant in the U.S. anyway. Sure. And so, yes, will it take some money to maybe convert some of that space? Sure, potentially. But we need the space. That's kind of the baseline. And so I think we're very well positioned over the next few years to do all of those things. Yeah,
that makes sense. I was definitely aware of the TVA investment. In fact, in 2022, I was on a convention, and they were discussing that there's existing infrastructure. You can transit from Chattanooga to Memphis and have charging ports all along. And I think there's quite a bit of corridors, with the interstate highway system throughout the Southeast where that's possible today as well. Talking about the EV shift, I think one of the major elements of the economy that has grown because of EVs is the battery production. Yeah. And so I wanted to touch on that. We've got a couple of great customers that we're working with throughout the Southeast, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Kentucky, and here in Tennessee, and just a lot of investment going on. We've got SK Innovation and Ford that developed SK Blue Oval, $5.8 billion investment there in a plant that's opening very soon near Elizabethtown, Kentucky. Toyota, 1.3 billion. North Carolina, 8 billion invested recently. South Carolina, AESC is investing a 1.5 billion on a new facility there, and just a lot of battery capacity being built out here in the Southeast.
Yeah, you know what's funny? When you think about a battery, right? Like what it is. It's anode, cathode material. There's electrolytes that kind of swirl around those that create the charge. There's separator film to keep everything nice, and then there's a housing that houses everything, and then that's what makes up a battery cell.
Sure.
Right. And I didn't know any of that until 2019-ish, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. So what does it take to make that? Was the question that we as a community asked. And as it turns out, ironically, it takes a lot of power. It takes a lot of utility capacity, also in the water and wastewater space, to make that happen. And as we've seen, just really nationally, the grid is not well prepared to handle it. And so TVA was one of the first in America to say, hey, like, there's actually a problem with trying to build out battery manufacturing because we may not have the capacity today. Now, of course, all this is a big formula that says this is a function of time and money, right? We can get you power. It's just going to take this, this, and this. And luckily, our community is well equipped from a distribution perspective to do that. And so because of our proximity to the investments you've already alluded to and the companies you've alluded to, we've seen a lot of companies that, whether it's the cathode material, whether it's separator film, even battery recycling, we've seen a lot of those look at our market just because we're well equipped and well prepared, but also our location. What's going to be interesting is how those flex with consumer demand, because obviously it's one formula for just the car itself, but obviously you need the motor or the power behind it.
Powertrain.
Yeah. And how do those companies kind of navigate the next few years is going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, and I think Lawrenceburg is well positioned. You mentioned, the access to utilities, the power infrastructure, and then the highway system.
Yes.
We're very close to several major industrial hubs.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is interesting to have seen over the last 20, 30 years is just the fuel economy of vehicles. And, that's been happening simultaneous to this EV shift, is that even with the ICE vehicles on the road, the fuel economy has just increased, dramatically, exponentially over the last several years. If you go back to 1990, the average miles per gallon was 21.2. You looked at a sedan, for example, through 2000, went up to 24, 27, and 2010. We're currently sitting at 36 miles per gallon average if you look at a small sedan.
Yeah.
And so I think what that's done is it's really softened the demand on the fossil fuel economy, while also, meeting those regulatory and statutory requirements in terms of environmental impact from the industry.
Yeah.
And I think combining that with a hybridization strategy of several of the OEMs, the EV production capacities, which we've mentioned, we've come a long way. If you look over the last 20, 30 years in terms of, the efficiency of vehicles.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I think about my first vehicle. It was a 1999 Ford Explorer. It was just a 2-door deal. I sometimes wonder if it's still around, but I'm wanting to say I was getting 9 to 10, maybe 11 miles a gallon out of that thing. And today, being in a rural community, you're going to see more trucks. And I drive a Ram, and I guess around the city, I'll get 20 miles a gallon. And to think about that doubling in terms of from an SUV truck perspective, even the efficiency matters quite a bit, and especially in today's economy, right? When inflationary pressures on groceries and gas and everything else really are hitting families and hitting consumers.
Right.
I think the value proposition for companies to maintain and really, I guess, promote efficiency among their products.
Yeah.
It will make a big difference as you see who kind of comes out on top of all this shift.
Absolutely. And I think that's why there's a lot of focus on hybrids right now, because while I've never owned one, I've driven several, and you don't really have that trade-off between reliability, range, and power like you do in a full battery electric vehicle. And so I think it's kind of a perfect mix of you're getting the fuel efficiency when you're sitting in traffic or going downhill or whenever it's running on the electric powertrain, but maintaining that reliability and range factor as well.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. What do you see if you look out, let's say, over the next 5 years for our county?
Sure.
What does that mean for the broader economy in terms of growth, new companies coming in? What's on the horizon?
Sure. So first things first, when you ask that question, it inherently has to do with recruiting new businesses, right? And in order to recruit a new business, you have to have somewhere for businesses to locate, right? This is very elementary type thinking, but just track with me, Alex.
Sure.
We've been very active in building out a new industrial area. So right now we have 151 acres that the community owns that we are currently extending utilities to. We're going to be working on the roadway into it as well to improve access off of the main highway. We're looking at land around it. And so we're currently studying in the form of due diligence. So think about archaeological reports and endangered species reports and environmental reports and about every report you can imagine. We're studying another 100 acres right now, and then we're looking at another 130 acres nearby. And so ultimately, I want to start answering your question by saying, in 5 years, our goal is to have a plus or minus 300 acre industrial park that is set up to be a multi-tenant park, meaning multiple industries locate there.
Sure.
That said, we are open to a large single tenant, but I think for the sake of economic diversity, also attracting multiple target industries, which go beyond just automotive. Food and beverage is really high up on our list as well because of our excess utility capacities. The multi-tenant structure makes the most sense for us. So number one, we have to have available space. We have to be in a desirable location. So that's something that we often don't have control over. However, the more that we tie ourselves to, let's say, the Nashville metro area, the Huntsville, Alabama metro area, and then the Shoals there in Northwest Alabama, because we touch all three of those metro areas, even though we're not a part of any one of them. But the more we tie, the more we say, hey, there's a sense of place. So not only do you have product to sell new industry, but you have people to offer new industry. And so that's kind of where we're at from a numbers perspective. Today, Lawrence County's population is about 46,000. We've grown about 5.25% in population over the last 5 years, which is very fast, considering that we didn't grow, but just about 3.9% over the previous 10 years. So we're seeing population growth kind of go up like this. I think you're going to see us be about 50,000 people by the end of the decade, which will get us on the short list for what most of our neighbors want, right? They want the Chick-fil-A, they want the new restaurant, they want this and that. But that's also going to provide a little bit more confidence to companies. So we'll be well positioned. I think, and I would hope that we probably by the end of the decade land another 2 or 3 new companies. We, of course, also keeping that in mind that we want our existing industries to grow and help them navigate the changing market. And so you'll see, I know at least one company that's actively looking to expand today. That's really exciting. There may be multiple, but all in, if we have 50,000 people, we probably need another 1,000 to 2,000 jobs. And that sounds scary when I talk to manufacturers about that, because they're like, well, hey, I'm having a little trouble, maintaining our manpower capacity today. And I said, that's an absolutely valid concern. However, when you think about, as we've talked about this entire time, our proximity to other OEMs, well, people don't realize we actually send more than 4,000 manufacturing workers north out of county every day. And what we're finding is as traffic increases in those communities around us, people are saying, hey, my time is worth a little bit more than this commute. Maybe I can find a job locally. And so I think finding the manpower today is going to be pretty easy. I'll knock on wood on that.
Sure.
And that's kind of been our bread and butter, is showing that, yes, when you locate here, you can find people here too.
Yeah, and that makes good sense. Given the choice, most people commuting would rather have a shorter commute closer to home. And, it used to be, certainly some of the factories that I've worked with, you would have people that would locate in Spring Hill or Nashville and commute south because of the amenities. But, as the community grows and there's more opportunities, more restaurants, et cetera, it becomes more of a home versus a commuting destination. But you mentioned the industrial park north here. That's come such a long way. You think back not that long ago, it was basically just one spec building in the field. And now you see all the earth being moved, the 3 facilities that are operating there now, and it's just really gone through a transformation over the last 5 or 7 years.
The transformation really has been fast over the last half decade, but it's important to note that that project started 20 years ago when we weren't even thinking about these things, right? And
Sure.
it takes a long-term strategy. I mentioned our new industrial park. We want 300 acres. I think 2 or 3 companies there would be awesome. But I hope that we can keep up with it, right? So I hope we land a couple. We have time to kind of step back as a community and say, all right, what are our housing needs? What are our training program needs? What are our retail needs? What are our healthcare needs? There's a lot of things that we need to step back and ask, because some communities they can get in trouble, right, if they grow too quickly. At the same time, though, free market capitalist over here, the market's going to supply all those things I just mentioned
Hmm.
as we grow. And so ultimately, though, being in a community that I guess has churches on every corner, I'm a big believer in that we don't want to lose our soul, right? The Bible says, what is it to a man to gain the world and lose his soul? And our community, like I said, we're not Nashville, we're not Huntsville. We want to be the best Lawrence County we can be, and we're looking for companies to come and partner to make us the best Lawrence County we can be, as opposed to someone coming in and saying, hey, we're going to change. You're going to change Lawrenceburg's name to X, right?
Right.
Whatever that the company is, and I think that's what's so exciting about being here right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, absolutely.
So Alex, sounds like you're going to be busy. What is new in the industry that we need to be looking out for that ENCONA is going to be leading on in the next few years?
Sure. Well, we've been very fortunate to have just received the license from the VDA for Canada. So for all of the Canadian market, we are the currently only licensed provider for VDA training. And so we plan to be doing a lot of work up there, both on the certification side and training side, consulting to support the tier 1s and OEMs that are operating in Canada. We spent a lot of time recently meeting with different OEMs here in the Southeast as well. Recently went to the Southern Automotive Conference in Chattanooga. Great event. A lot of effort went into that from Tennessee Manufacturing Association and efforts from the state. Stuart McWhorter and his team were there. And so, that was a really great event. Met with a lot of different tier 1s and OEMs there and looking at, needs that they have coming up here in the Southeast. We were also recently at the BMW Supplier Conference in South Carolina and met with a lot of different industries there. It was around 2,500 attendees to that event.
Wow.
And so, it's just a really exciting time in the automotive industry. A lot coming up on the horizon, and we're really excited to be a part of it.
Awesome.
I wanted to zoom out here just a moment, kind of look at some more, let's say, geo-economic global topics that we've been dealing with. Semiconductor manufacturing, of course, has been a hot topic in the industry. I was at a conference in Berlin earlier this year, and they were comparing the infrastructure investments from North America versus Europe versus Asia, in particular China. And I think what we've seen happen is, the shift to EV via semiconductor manufacturing and capacity in Asia has outpaced, exponentially multiple times what we're doing in North America and in Europe as well. There's a lot of incentives, a lot of, I would say directives, both from federal government agencies and in local economies to invest in semiconductor manufacturing and capacity. And we've seen some of that. We've got some customers that are, expanding capacities in North America. But I think that's what's going to, from an economic perspective, allow the U.S. to be competitive on a global scale is to have that in-house capacity, somewhere within the continental United States to feed those electronics that are going into the automotives. And not just automotive. I mean, semiconductor manufacturing, of course, is going into appliances, consumer electronics, and it's just such a crucial element to a lot of different industries within the economy.
Right. It's more than just mobility. It's also just the livability. Mm-hmm. We rely on smartphones. We all live and die by the calendar. That's on that, and it takes those semiconductor semiconductor components to make it happen. And so when you think about, I guess, again, this election season, I think everyone agrees we need more capacity for semiconductor manufacturing in the United States. I think how we get there, I think that's where we differ on it. Ultimately, though, I think we are going to get there, and that's what's exciting. But from what my understanding, especially on the incentive side, those are going to remain regardless of who wins in that space in particular. Secondarily, it takes also a lot of utilities, just like batteries. So communities that have to be well positioned to, I guess, capitalize on that from, I guess, a community and economic development perspective. And lastly, there's going to be a huge curve when it comes to building out training programs for the manufacturing of those. I think it's highly automated, but that's the way we're going with things, right? And how is AI going to then kind of step into that space? And then also, what is that the product that comes out of the semiconductor factory? How does that going to improve AI for also other livability considerations? So again, we live at a very weird time with all of that. Ultimately, though, we're going to get there. I mean, I'm confident the world's going to keep turning, even if it doesn't. But it's a national security interest also. There's an economic interest. It needs to happen.
Yeah, it touches on an earlier point that, talking about the breadth of the automotive industry, and you mentioned AI. So many technology companies are now finding themselves de facto in the automotive industry, and the same thing with precious metals companies. It comes to lithium and all the different core components to battery production, and so we're certainly at a point where it feels like 40-50% of the entire GDP is connected to the automotive industry, in some way or the other.
Yeah. So I have a question, Alex. How is ENCONA going to kind of obviously we're automotive specific? How obviously I see this as a business opportunity for you guys. Do y'all foresee that as such? Are you going to flex with that?
Yeah, to an extent. So we have, conducted some internal studies on what is the impact of AI, on the automotive industry. We use AI in some of our applications currently for data analytics to look at different factors within the industry. But what we see happening more, related to the North American market specifically, is that a lot of companies are, transitioning from ICE to EV production, or from EV back into ICE to pivot to current market demands. And there's a lot of localization of supply chains.
Okay.
That began during the pandemic.
Yeah.
I think there was so much stress on supply chain shortages. Companies that were reliant on sea freight, were switching to air freight, and operating at net losses, right? And so localization of supply chain has been a huge topic within the industry that we've been supporting on. We've done several projects where we're helping companies relocate production and relaunch production from China to the U.S., from Germany to the U.S., even from one state to the other. And so, that's brought a lot of opportunities for us on our project management services side of the business. On the consulting side, we've seen a lot more diversification, particularly with tier ones. So companies that were traditionally Korean companies that serve the Asian OEM market, diversifying and starting to supply to a German OEM. And so with that, they have to build those competencies, which we're in the business of delivering, for understanding and navigating the German automotive standards, getting the certifications, getting the training, being conforming, and being able to have and cultivate that relationship with their end customer. So that's brought a lot of opportunities for us. We've been fortunate to work with, again, a lot of different tier ones, tier twos, smaller companies, some very large companies, and help them with their conformance to the different standards. We're uniquely positioned in North America as one of the license providers, which I mentioned, from the German Automotive Association. And so in that position, we're able to go to Berlin and help them understand what's happening in the North American market. And they're working on standards constantly to support this transition. There's always updates happening to the automotive standards so that it's current with whatever is currently happening in the industry. Cybersecurity has been a huge topic. We do a lot of consulting, assessments, and training right now on cybersecurity requirements within the automotive industry. There's just a lot going on in terms of that growth because of the transition, but also just because of the overall economy.
Sure.
I think we've done very well in North America coming out of the pandemic, to not only avoid a recession, but see year-over-year growth within the industry. That's a lot of the opportunities we've had with consulting and with training. What we see on the horizon, we're doing a lot with the German OEMs right now. We've been pretty fortunate with our relationships with Volkswagen and with Mercedes in particular, and so we're doing quite a bit with those companies and a lot of their suppliers. We've been working with Ford on some of their quality training. And so, when we look at where we're going to be in the next year, 3 years, 5 years, definitely we see growth. We think we'll be able to expand our services, adapt as the market adapts, And what that might mean for this office, we've got personnel throughout North America. We're definitely looking for the Tennessee office to grow,
Awesome.
to add some more sales personnel, to add to our current project management staff, and ensure that we're positioned to feed the needs of the local industries that we're serving here.
Yep.
You mentioned automotive, and that is certainly by far the majority of our portfolio. We do quite a bit in general manufacturing as well. However, we work with a lot of hydraulics companies, electronics companies. Anyone that's manufacturing something, at one point or another, will go through a certification or a training.
Yeah.
And I did want to mention that if you've got companies that are moving here to the local area, one of the main things that you have to go through as a business to ship to your end customer is to take those customer specific requirements and implement them into your quality management system. And so we spend a lot of time helping sites become certified, whether it be to ISO 9001, 14001 for environmental, or IETF 6949, and then helping them be conforming on a continual basis, as their business matures.
Sure. So it sounds like you're going to be really busy. And that's awesome. And so I think it'd be appropriate at this time to say, on behalf of the community, thank you for, setting up shop here in Lawrenceburg. We really think that you can reach the world from here. And obviously, ENCONA is part of that. I stay gone quite a bit, trying to recruit and build relationships. I know you do too. So, any upcoming travel to look out for from you as far as going and seeing?
So we do spend quite a bit of time, on the road. I'm out in the, Southeast pretty much every month. We've done a couple trips this year, Germany, Canada a couple of times, meeting with customers, different industry partners. And we've spent some time in Africa recently, and a lot of connections between South Africa and North America as well, particularly with the OEMs and some of the tier ones. But a lot of my time is spent in Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, and Kentucky, and Mississippi as well. And so we try to be flexible to our customer needs. And I always tell my customers, whenever you need me, call. I'm just a few hours away, and we'll definitely support you in a way that we can. But we're certainly proud to be a part of the local community. We love being able to live and work here in Lawrence County, and it's just a great place for industries and for families.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as mentioned, that was on purpose, and I like to think that the chamber had a little bit to do with that, but really it's you guys that make that happen. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for coming today, and we really appreciate everything that you and your team are doing here for the local community.
Of course, my pleasure.
All right, thanks, Ryan, and thank you everyone for watching.